A very good morning to all of you. In our previous lecture, we understood Bipin Chandra Pal's description of his hostel life. So here he describes the life at the what we call student mess at Kolkata, Calcutta boarding house, and that was a kind of republic, a small republic, and the way this particular mess was run and the democratic approach that was adopted to run the mess, and we saw how Chatterjee tries to differentiate between the inner domain and the outer domain by giving this example, and he thinks that it is unlike the public and private system in the western countries. So what we understand through this example is that his Bipin Chandra Pal's use of the terms parliamentary procedure to describe the communitarian activities, means the activities in the group of a boarding house standing in a place of the nation. So you can just look at this particular experience or narration or description rather as what we call a kind of allegorical description. So here we should understand this boarding house as in place of nation. So he says, Chatterjee says, this particular description cannot be dismissed simply as something which is trivial. Means the language used by Paul is very indicative. Yes, it's a kind of what we call the combination of two discourses, the inner domain and the outer domain, the spiritual and what we call the material. So that is the real combination. That's what we realize through this example. So through this example, we understand that there is an attempt in the recent historiography, Indian historiography, to talk of these as domains of elite and subaltern politics. So when we talk about the inner domain and the outer domain, after the independence or during the post-colonial state, after the Britishers left, historiography, Indian historiography was revisited, and the new historians, historiographers, those who write history, they have started talking about the domains of elite and subaltern politics. So I refer to Ranjit Guha in the previous lecture. So this is the reference to subaltern studies, the journal started from by Ranjit Guha. And the essays in this particular volume represent this domain. They started talking about the history of the people who have been subordinated historically. So this statement can be taken as a programmatic statement of the subaltern studies on some aspects of history of colonial India. So after, means before independence, there was a nationalism, the talk on nationalism, which was introduced by the middle class elite. So the history was dominated by this elite domain, we can say. The discourses proposed by the elite class people. But after independence, there is yet another domain that was brought into focus. So it started talking about subaltern politics, subaltern history. Subaltern is the people who have been marginalized historically, the people who have been subordinated, marginalized in the name of caste, in the name of class, in the name of language, in the name of race, etc. So these are different things that we need to understand when we understand the concept of nation. when we understand nationalism, nation, and its representation. So, one of the important results of this historiographical approach, of course, we are going to study subaltern studies in the next unit. Therein, you will understand what they mean by subaltern history, subaltern studies, etc. So, what we understand here is that subaltern studies or historiographical approach changed its perception. Means because of this particular approach, the perception towards history changed. So the historiographical approach, or sorry, historiographic, I'm very sorry for the pronunciation, historiographical approach has been precisely the demonstration, means an attempt to show something. It shows, it demonstrates that each domain has not only acted in opposition to and as a limit upon the other, he says, but through this process of struggle has also shaped the emergent form of the other. So these two domains were recently introduced in the historiography, and they stood in opposition to each other, but at the same time they represented the process of struggle. And this process set the emergence of the other. Means within what we call is us, there is a notion of the other as well. As it happened in the Orientalism and Western studies, you can say. Edward Said came up with Orientalism, and in his study, he tried to show how this notion of author is being created by the Western scholars, by the Western epistemology, we can say. So the presence of a populist or communitarian elements in the liberal constitutional order of the post-colonial state would not to be read as a sign of the inauthenticity or disgenuousness of elite politics. Yes, what we understand through this statement made by Chatterjee is that when we talk about the liberal movement of nationalism, we have to also talk about the presence of this communism or populist elements, communitarian elements. Yes, apart from the nationalism, there were certain forces who are demanding for their own, what you call rights. And although we have certain positive perception of looking at the liberal constitutional order of the post-colonial state, means after post-independence, we talk about our constitution, Indian constitution, which is very liberal. Within that as well, there are certain elements which are communitarian or populist. It's based on certain groups of people and their demands. We cannot say that India as a nation does not have any drawbacks at all. Its constitution to have certain kind of limitations. So the government functions based on that, and that cannot be looked at the negative side as the inauthenticity or disgenuousness of elite politics. Elite politics has its own role to play, but there can be opposition to that as well. That has to be understood. For example, when we talk about the present scenario, the government may come pass different bills, different acts, and there can be opposition to those bills and acts. That does not mean that the government does not have its relevance at all. It is inauthentic. It does not have its own quality as such. There can be opposing forces as well. So what Chatterjee thinks about this? For him, it is a recognition in the elite domain of the very real presence of an arena of subaltern politics. Okay, there is an elite domain, the elite domain, but in that as well, there is the presence of the subaltern politics as well. We have to understand that as well. So the elite dominates the subaltern politics, over which it must dominate, and aid which also had to be negotiated on its own terms for the purposes of producing consent. Means this opposition, this conflict, this struggle between two different domains is bound to be there. Means when we talk about elite, the presence of subaltern politics cannot be denied. At the same time, it is an acceptable fact, an accepted fact rather, that there is the dominance of the elite, and the negotiation between these two domains goes on for consent. Consent means a state of agreement to bring agreement between the two forces, two domains. So, on the other hand, the domain of subaltern politics has increasingly become familiar with and even adapted itself to the institutional forms of forms characteristic of the elite domain. Means, look, when we talk about communism, when we talk about Naxalite movements, when we talk about different opposing forces, they're bound to be there. But these also again, subaltern politics, for example, talks about subaltern. You have to keep the word in your mind. Subaltern stands for marginalized groups, the group of people who have been marginalized historically, or in terms of their caste, in terms of their creed, in terms of their income, we can say, in terms of gender, for example, women have been subordinated, have been marginalized. These groups are there, and they have become familiar with. The domain of subaltern politics has increasingly become familiar with, and even it has adapted. To adapt means to uh, what you call to adjust with. It has adapted itself to the institutional forms, which have been characteristics of the elite domain. Now, means when Nehru was there, so we claimed of what you call the mixed economy. We talked about the socialism and even capitalism, the combination of both. But it does not mean that this particular domain was dominated by the people belonging to the marginalized section. When we talk about Nehru represents the elite domain that has to be understood. Okay, and many of the aspects of these institutional forms were being determined by the elite class, the leader belonging to the elite class. And there was an opposition to that, but the negotiation also went on to come to the consent. Okay, so what is he trying to demonstrate or explain through this particular argument is that the point, therefore, is no longer one of simply demarcating and identifying the two domains in their separateness. You have to understand that. Means you cannot have a clear cut demarcation. You cannot, or you cannot um, attempt to bring them together, make them one. Okay, means an attempt should not be there to demarcate or identify the separateness of these two domains. Okay, what he says, therefore, the point which is what was required in order to first to break down the totalizing claims of a nationalist historiography. There cannot be one history as such. Totalizing claims. So India, for example, we can't say that Indian history is like this. Therefore, there are different opposing forces. You might know it. There are different people who claim different history. They don't accept the history uh, of the elite domain. Within political parties as well, there is a tug of war regarding the historical contribution of the leaders in the freedom struggle. Now, as a child, you must have learned history, and you must have learned different the contribution of different leaders. But as you grow up, you realize that what we have learned changes according to the governments, according to the dominant forces, the hegemonic aspects. So there is not a single nationalist historiography. Okay, we cannot claim of a single history as such. That is the situation, that is the scenario. Then what now our task is to trace in their mutually conditioned historicities. Historicities, the specific forms that have appeared. On the one hand, in the domain defined by the hegemonic project of the nationalist modernity, and on the other, in the numerous fragmented resistance to that normalizing project. So, what should be an attempt of the scholar is to trace, to find in their mutually conditioned historicities. Mutually means which is suitable to each other. Mutual, we say. So mutually means together they must have come upon certain consents, certain agreements. So those domains have to be found. Because as I mentioned earlier, nationalism itself is a kind of hegemony project. Means when you talk about nationalism, when you talk about modernity, these days because of social media, because of technology, people have started talking about these things on a larger scale. But imagine the scenario. What would have been the condition before 2000, let's say, when social media wasn't rampant? There was no Facebook, there was no WhatsApp, there was no Twitter, there was no Insta. So all these tools were absent. There were no private channels before 90s, you might be knowing. In the 90s and 80s, only Doordarshan was the channel in India. And later, gradually, the private channels started appearing on the scene. And even then, news channels were not so active. After 2000, the news channels, private news channels have become so dynamic. So, given that scenario, you can understand that the hegemonic project of nationalist modernity was accepted by groups that were means kind of at least there was no resistance as such. Means because it was in a fragmented form. Whatever resistance was there, that was not highlighted. But still, there were many groups. We talk about the Naxal groups. We talk about the farmer movements, etc. All these groups were there to oppose this normalizing project. Means normalizing means it was thought that okay, when we talk about Rashtravad, this is what Rashtravad is. This is what a nationhood is. This is what modernity is. Now today we oppose the present government. In those days, also there was an opposition. Otherwise, national emergency wouldn't have been declared by the then Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. Mrs. Gandhi had declared emergency in the year 1795, you might be knowing. It was a resistance to the normalizing project, the government policy. There were many activists. In Gujarat, for example, you might be knowing, Mehta Patkar was very active for this opposition to Narmada Bachao Andolan, we call it. So in UP, Sundarlal Bahuguna was active. So all these environmentalists, all these socialists were active. These were the fragmented resistances to the normalizing project. So today, because of the growing awareness among the people, because of the social media, we think that no, the things have changed very drastically. It was there in the past as well. We have to accept that. So this is how things are going on. So what is he trying to what do you call demonstrate here through this particular exercise, through this essay? This is the exercise I wish to carry out. He says, Partha Chatterjee says, this is what I'm trying to do. Since the problem will be directly posed of the limits to be supposed universality of the modern regime of power, and with it of the post-enlightenment disciplines of knowledge, it might appear as though the exercise is meant to emphasize once more an Indian or Oriental exceptionalism. So I shall talk about this in the next part of my discussion. What is trying to explain here? We shall have a discussion on it.